So, Avengers Infinity War. I'm going to spoil everything. For a couple of reasons. One, I just want to talk about it. I want to talk about kind of all the plot points and how I felt about them. And two, this is precisely the kind of movie where spoilers don't matter. Or at least they don't matter in the sense that you wouldn't be watching this review to try and decide whether you wanted to see it or not. Either you've already decided you're going to see this movie, or you've already decided you are not going to see this movie. Chances are, if you're watching this, you've probably already seen the movie. Especially, I'm recording this, it's still new in theaters as I'm recording this. But, it will be up on YouTube for years after that. Assuming YouTube is still a viable business model for years after that. So whenever you're watching this video, whatever year it is, you've probably already seen the movie. Anyways, what am I rambling on about? Time to talk about the movie. If you want a spoiler-free kind of recommend or don't recommend, I recommend it. Now, get into spoilers here. So, this movie really impressed me. And these Marvel movies, boy, they've really been slamming it, haven't they? Like, every time you think, oh, geez, this is really ambitious, can they pull this off? Like, remember the first Avengers movie? Way back when this came out, and people are like, well, you've got all these different superheroes from different movies, but can they tie them together into one story? And then that first Avengers movie came out, and it was beautiful. It tied everything together perfectly. It was so successful that I think, people are even starting to forget how skeptical we were of the whole enterprise before this came out. People, forget that people didn't think that the first Avengers was going to work. And then the Guardians of the Galaxy were like, this looks a little bit strange. Are they going to be able to pull this off? And then, Captain America Civil War, people are like, boy, okay, this is a little bit ambitious. Are they going to be able to pull off a coherent storyline around this? And every time, they've just been slamming it. It's amazing. Like, these guys at Marvel Studios are biting off all these ambitious projects and doing great with it. And this movie as well, people were skeptical. People in my office were kind of talking about this and be like, oh, it's too many superheroes crammed into one movie. It'll never be a coherent storyline. I shared some of that skepticism. I wanted to be optimistic, but I was thinking, okay, way too many superheroes crammed into this. Plus, Thanos. Like, what are they going to do with Thanos? He's just going to be this big guy that kind of clobbers them and they're all going to fight back against him. Like, how do you make a story out of that? And they did it. There was actually a story here with a lot of different plot points, lots of setups and payoffs. And in fact, I didn't realize this. Obviously you knew Thanos was being set up in certain parts. Like the end of the Avengers movie, turned out Thanos was behind the whole things. Guardians of the Galaxy's movies have been referencing Thanos. So you knew he was getting set up in those movies. But a whole bunch of things were getting set up for this movie that I didn't even realize. Like Thor Ragnarok, the way that it kind of ended with all the Asgardians on a ship in space, just so you had that piece set up perfectly for the beginning of this movie, Infinity War. And a whole bunch of things like that, where it's clear now they've been setting things up over the course of several movies to get kind of all the pieces in the right spot for the beginning of this movie. So you can kind of have all these characters in certain spots and have these relationships and have certain heroes go off in certain places. My hat goes off to those guys. I'm going to make a quick digression, indulge me on this, but around about the time I turned 30, my late 20s, I started to notice that a lot of these people who worked in Hollywood were about the same age as me, maybe even younger. You know, because when you're a kid, you kind of have this kind of reverence for movies that's kind of created by these genius adults and served up to you as entertainment. And then I started to notice these guys are about the same age as me, or younger in some cases, you know? These aren't like godlike beings. These are, you know, people maybe if I had worked a little bit harder, applied myself more, I could have been making those movies instead of them. And you know, you get out of some Hollywood movies and they are awful, and you think, "What? Geez, I could have done that," or I don't have the technical skills, but I could have written that screenplay. That, you know, that was stupid. But I got out of this movie and I thought, boy, I could not have done that. You know, to keep track of all these pieces over all these movies and kind of set everything up so it all pays off in this movie. Boy, I could not have kept track of that. Or the pacing of this movie, how you have all these superheroes juggling for screen time and they all got screen time without feeling overstuffed. I couldn't have written this. I mean, hats off to those guys. There are some genius writers kind of working at Marvel Studios in order to kind of bring all these franchise pieces together. Consider me amazed. Like this is, you know, I guess in one sense it's not high art, like it's not Shakespeare or anything, but if there is a craft to making movie franchises, an art to it, if you will, to the sense that art and craft are kind of used as interchangeable terms. These guys have got this craft down. Really enjoyed kind of how smoothly this plot worked out, how all these different plot points from previous movies were paying off. And of course, the real fun of this movie is seeing all these different superheroes together. So, you know, like seeing Thor meet the Guardians of the Galaxy, and seeing Iron Man and Star-Lord argue with each other, or seeing, you know, Doctor Strange and Iron Man and Spider-Man together, or, you know, Spider-Man meeting up with the Guardians of the Galaxy, or all these different characters meeting up. Boy, that was just a lot of fun. And the writers of these Marvel movies, a long time ago, decided to kind of opt for fun rather than kind of the brooding superhero angst. Although there's a bit of angst thrown in here. But there's just a lot of fun in this movie. You know, like a lot of funny lines, a lot of funny banter. I felt sometimes that, particularly with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are famous for their banter. I felt sometimes like they've been in danger of overdoing it a little bit and kind of getting a little bit too cute for their own good. But I didn't feel that in this movie. I felt like kind of all the banter was working, the jokes were landing. I thought it was good, yeah. And then those action sequences, huh? Now, I have to say, maybe the older I get, and the more I kind of contemplate, oh boy, what's the meaning of life anyways? Like, what are we doing here on Earth? What's the purpose of it all? The more these kind of big action scenes just kind of seem like a waste of time to me when I'm in my more philosophical mood, because they don't really do anything to elevate humanity or kind of shed any light on the human condition. So I've got that in one corner of my brain. On the other hand, if you just kind of shut off that critical thinking part of your brain and just kind of go with like the 9-year-old boy inside of you, they can be a lot of fun. I mean, who knows why men love action scenes? I don't know, some Darwinian thing, or who knows, but we do. And this movie had some awesome action scenes. I mean, it was pretty much just kind of one big action scene from start to finish. But the choreography was great, the action was intense. So, you know, like that scene at the end where kind of all the space monsters started attacking Wakanda and there's a huge battle. To a certain extent, you can say that's been done before. I mean, that was kind of the same climax at the end of the first Avengers movie, where there was this just big long battle against all these space monsters. Sorry, I'm losing my articulation. You could argue it's been done before, and it has been done before, but it was fun. I liked it, and there were some really good beats thrown in there. You know, like Thor, when all of a sudden Thor entered that battle, and I almost forgot about this, that he had that thunder god power that he had inherited at the end of the previous Thor Ragnarok movie, right? Where he kind of flies up into the sky and his eyes glaze over with that lightning, and then he just comes down and boom, the lightning everywhere, and whew, boy, that was really cool. Yeah, so there were those beats during the action movies where it's like, boy, these guys, they know how to do an action sequence. You know, it's not just kind of boring fighting. It's, you know, there are definite beats here in these fighting sequences that were really fun to watch. So, again, hats off to them. These Marvel guys know what they're doing. So, yeah, love the action sequences, love the banter between the characters, loved all the superheroes meeting each other. I guess now let's talk about Thanos. Thanos is interesting. He's more interesting than I thought he would be. You know, he's got a, you know, it's a crazy idea, but it's an idea. He wants to bring balance to the universe, and I guess he's worried about the problem of overpopulation and limited resources, which arguably is a real concern. I mean, you hear about that kind of problem nowadays somewhat. I know it's in debate how much of a real concern it really is, but arguably a real concern. The problem with Thanos, a potential problem with him, is he's almost a little bit too powerful. He's kind of near omnipotent. To back up slightly, I was, in my youth, a comic books fan. I read DC instead of Marvel, but I was a comic books fan when I was a teenager in the 90s. So I read the comic books during the 90s, and also I got my hands on a lot of kind of old comic books from the 1980s, just because those were kind of being sold cheaply in my comic book shop. So I'm familiar with when you get like a Justice League or the Teen Titans or kind of a superhero team up. The combined powers of all these superheroes, you know, Green Lantern plus Superman plus Wonder Woman plus the Flash, you know, by the time you combine all these powers together, the superhero team is pretty close to omnipotent anyways. So in order to get something to challenge that, you've got to kind of create like a near omnipotent supervillain. And then I never really liked those stories when I was a comic book fan as a kid. I thought it just got a little bit too weird with all these kind of superpowers, and then the story, to a certain extent, almost stopped making sense. And I thought, geez, I'd much rather just go back to like Batman, where, you know, the superhero has limited powers and the villain has limited powers, and kind of the rules of combat are more clearly defined, rather than these kind of weird stories where everyone's omnipotent. But we've crossed that bridge already. Kind of, you know, Marvel's kind of introduced all these characters now. To be fair, they kind of come from a 60-year comic book tradition that Marvel's drawing on. So now that we have all these superheroes combined, we need some sort of near godlike villain to kind of give them a challenge. But I think, you know, the problem with giving Thanos all these powers is it creates inconsistencies. So, you know, Thanos has all these Infinity Stones. By the end of it, he can alter reality or kind of alter people's perceptions of reality. He can now control time with one of those Infinity Stones, you know, going back in time to kind of reverse something. And so it's like, how are you going to make a story out of this? And I suspect that if you went through and you analyzed this film closely, you would find a lot of inconsistencies. because kind of once Thanos has the ability to do everything, it makes it kind of anything that happens in the story, you're like, well, why didn't Thanos just do this? Why didn't Thanos just do that? Why didn't he just kind of snap his fingers and kind of erase the reality or everything now that he's got that power? That being said, I didn't analyze the movie like that. And I didn't analyze it in part because I'm lazy, and in part because, you know, the movie did its job. Like, I was so carried along by the spectacle of it that I was just kind of content to go along with it for the ride. Now, I suspect sooner or later, CinemaSins or some other kind of anally retentive geeks are gonna start kind of going over this movie with a fine-tooth comb, just because that's what geeks do. And they're gonna find all these inconsistencies of parts where Thanos should have used his powers in these cases, because he seemed to have almost omnipotent powers, like powers to do whatever he wanted. So does the whole storyline make sense? I don't know. I wasn't analyzing it. I was just kind of so caught up in the spectacle of it, which I guess is, you know, what the movie wants you to do. It's an argument that the movie has done its job. I guess we'll see, you know, kind of when I go in for a second or third or fourth viewing. I'm not going to go back to the theater, but, you know, next time this movie's on TV, I'll definitely give it a rewatch. So yeah, we'll see about that. Okay, the other thing, I said I was going to spoil everything, so we might as well talk about the ending, right? So yeah, what did you think about that ending? I don't know what to think. So I was watching this movie, and I did know that this was kind of part of a two-parter, kind of. I don't know, like the news has been a little bit inconsistent, maybe. Or maybe I just haven't been paying attention to the right news. But when this was first announced, it was not announced as Infinity Wars Part 1 and 2. And then I think they changed it. It was just Infinity Wars and then another Avengers sequel, like next year. So I was not entirely sure if this was a two-parter or not. And then that part when Thor came down with his axe right into Thanos, and Thor said, "I told you you would die for this." I thought, okay, this might be the end of the movie here. Thor's going to kill Thanos, and this is going to be the resolution. But then when kind of Thanos escaped, and it turned out that the movie did end on a cliffhanger, I was like, okay. I at the back of my mind, I was kind of half expecting it would end on a cliffhanger anyways. So kind of half of the world's population dissolves, or I guess half of the universe's population dissolves, right? And I think, if I'm following this right, this was because of Thanos' plan to kind of get rid of half the universe to kind of preserve the resources for the rest of it, so the rest of it doesn't go hungry. Yeah, so, yeah, first of all, does that plan even make sense? Because people were going hungry all throughout human history, right? Even before the Earth's population was a fraction of what it was now, they were still poor and hungry people. So, does getting rid of half the Earth's population solve the hunger problem? Has Thanos really thought this through? I don't know, but put that aside for now. The thing I want to talk about is you have characters like Peter Parker dissolve, Black Panther dissolve, and you know that these characters aren't dead because you know, everyone knows that there's another Spider-Man movie currently in production. So that, you know, Spider-Man's not really dead. He's got another movie kind of coming out, which, I don't know, do you count that as a negative or not? Initially, I was leaning towards counting this as a negative. Like, Marvel, what are you doing here? Who are you trying to fool? We know Spider-Man's not really dead. You know, this is just some sort of cheap trick. But then I thought about it for a little while longer, and I thought, well, but you can't really blame Marvel for this. I mean, we as the audience have an unfair advantage because we kind of read Wikipedia and we read the news articles and we know these movies are kind of in production. But, you know, maybe that's on us. Maybe we shouldn't be reading all this stuff. Maybe we should have like just gone into movies like people went into the movies in the old days before the internet, and not kind of researched all the next movies that were coming. And you know, if Marvel wants to try and create some suspense, maybe it's not their fault that we know all these next movies are coming. You know, like, I mean, what's Marvel supposed to do? Like, they can't keep these movies a secret. It's just kind of, the production process is just too big. You have to get started years in advance. And can you blame them for really wanting to try and create a little bit of suspense, even though it's kind of a futile effort? I don't know. Count that as a negative, or maybe count that as it's not Marvel's fault. They're just doing the best they can with the production lineup they have. I don't know. But we all know now that these heroes are going to have to get resurrected somehow. So, how are they going to do this? Is it going to be like some cheap cop-out way, like, oh, we're going to go back in time and change everything? Or is it going to be something authentic? I don't know, but like, part of the evaluation of the ending of this movie is just going to have to be on standby until next year when we find out how they resolve it. And if it's a good resolution, then retrospectively that will kind of raise our evaluation of this movie. But if it's a bad resolution, then retrospectively that will lower our evaluation of this movie. So it's hard to make a full evaluation of it. And the other thing I wondered as well is, since we know Spider-Man's not really dead, and we know Black Panther is not really dead, what about all the other deaths that happened in the movie? Like, now is Gamora really dead? Or are they going to go back in time and resurrect her? You know, if I was a betting man, if I was putting down money on this, my prediction is they're probably going to go back in time and resurrect Gamora as well. Because they very kind of clearly set it up in this Infinity War movie that what do they call them? The Infinity Stones give you the power over time. They clearly set that up. So they're going to take advantage of that in the next movie? And then, you know, what about Loki? Go back and resurrect him as well? Thor likes Loki, at least. Yeah, I don't know. Is anybody ever going to be truly dead in the Marvel Universe anymore? I mean, as a rule, I don't like the going back in time and changing everything plot device in a movie. Now, I make exceptions for movies where the whole premise is going back in time and changing everything. Because then you know exactly what kind of ride you're getting into from the beginning. Like Back to the Future. Okay, the whole premise of that movie is going back in time and changing everything. So fair enough. But a movie like, you know, like the original Superman. You know, like the 1978 Superman, right? Where he goes back in time to resurrect Lois Lane. That's just kind of stupid, because that just kind of comes out of nowhere. So, if they go back in time to change everything in the next Avengers movie, how am I going to feel about that? I'm leaning towards not good, but I guess we'll just have to see how they do this in the execution. Maybe they'll come up with a clever way that kind of makes it feel authentic, or maybe it'll just be kind of a cop-out. I mean, I don't know. I guess, you know, to give credit where credit is due, these Marvel movies are always ambitious. I mean, this whole Avengers Infinity War movie was really ambitious, and that was a really ambitious note to leave the cliffhanger on. So, every time I think, boy, they're not going to pull it off. And they've always pulled it off so far. So, yeah, we'll see. Are they going to be able to pull this off in a way that feels authentic and not a cop-out? I guess we'll find out. Oh, one more note. So no Ant-Man and Hawkeye in this movie, huh? I can't complain about that too much because they were already juggling way too many superheroes as it was. So like, I didn't really feel like I missed them. I didn't feel like the movie was missing anything because there was no Hawkeye. But I did kind of feel a little bit strange, right? If the whole point of this movie was to combine everything, then why not just throw Hawkeye and Ant-Man in for a quick cameo? Now, they did have an in-universe explanation for why this didn't work, for why there was no Hawkeye and Ant-Man, right? Because Hawkeye and Ant-Man at the end of Civil War had been among the superheroes that the government had captured. I mean, Captain America and the Black Widow and the other ones had gone rogue and were out in hiding. But Ant-Man and Hawkeye had been captured, so they made a sort of deal with the government. So that actually works kind of that works consistently? No. It makes sense. It makes sense as an in-universe explanation. Sorry, the more I talk, the less articulate I get. You'll have to forgive me on some of this. It makes sense. I wonder though, was there a behind-the-scenes explanation as well as to why those actors weren't available for this? Or was this planned all along for this in-universe explanation, and then we'll see in Avengers 4 where they'd been? Yeah, and that new Ant-Man and Wasp movie is coming out, so next month, a couple months from now, it would be interesting to see how that ties in. And it'd be interesting, like the whole thing with like the Hulk refusing to come out was interesting as well. It was a little bit kind of a cheap thing maybe, but like, are they going to give this a satisfying payoff as to why the Hulk was refusing to come out? Or is this going to be one of those things that never gets resolved? If they give it a satisfying payoff, you know, we get like a satisfying explanation as to why Hulk was just refusing to come out during that whole battle, then yeah, I'm all for it. If it turns out this was just a cheap plot device to kind of keep the Hulk from like tipping the balance of the fight too much, then I'm going to be disappointed. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. So a whole lot of this is just kind of pending. But in terms of kind of pure spectacle and pure entertainment, I loved it. I'm going to give this movie 9 out of 10 stars. It almost gets 10 out of 10. I'm taking away 1 star for kind of the cliffhanger ending that I don't know how it's going to kind of get resolved. And also for Thanos being a little bit too omnipotent for his own good. Even though I know you kind of have to do that at this point in the franchise, I just thought, I don't know, it's borderline on getting a little bit inconsistent and weird. Yeah, what did you think? Okay, I'm going to finish here.